When I was 11, my dad gave my little brother Elijah a brand new mountain bike for his birthday. It was bright red, with thick tires and shiny silver handlebars that gleamed like they were polished every morning. I still remember the way Elijah screamed with joy, riding it around our driveway until the sun went down. A week later, I turned 12. My gift, a $20 bill folded into a paper airplane and tossed across the table. "Don't spend it all in one place," Dad joked, chuckling into his beer. I laughed too, but I felt something shift in my chest that day. Like I was being shown, not told, that I was playing a different game in this family. That difference never went away. If anything, it grew sharper with time, like a crack in the foundation that everyone pretended wasn't there until the house finally started to lean. My name's Alan. I'm 28 now, and depending on who you ask, I either walked out on my family or I freed myself from them. Both might be true. I've kept this story to myself for a long time, mostly because telling it felt like opening a wound that never quite healed. But the other night, something happened that brought all those old fractures back to the surface. So I figured it's time to tell it, start to finish. Maybe then, I'll stop carrying the weight of people who never once tried to carry me. Growing up, it was always Elijah and Alan, but only in the sense that our names were said together. In practice, I was more like the second child someone forgot to unbox. Elijah, 2 years younger, had this easy charisma, the kind that made teachers smile, neighbors dote, and my parents, well, beam like he was some divine miracle. I don't blame him for being born with that glow, but I do blame my parents for how they bathed in it and left me in the shadows. Every photo on the wall featured Elijah at the center, even when it was my birthday. Every conversation at dinner somehow twisted into a story about how Elijah scored a goal, aced a test, or made everyone laugh at school. When I brought home good grades, Dad would grunt, "Nice," without looking up. When Elijah did the same, it was family dinner out and ice cream after. By the time I hit high school, I had stopped trying. What was the point? I wasn't rebellious, not in the way people expected. I didn't act out, didn't break curfew or skip school. I just quietly faded. I learned to get home late enough to miss dinner, to nod through conversations where my opinion wasn't asked, to live in the background like a shadow that didn't complain about being stepped over. I started working small jobs, mowing lawns, fixing bikes, eventually tutoring, and saved up money just for the satisfaction of knowing I could provide for myself. I didn't even tell them when I got accepted into a good university with scholarships. I just packed, left, and texted Mom the address in case she ever wanted to visit. She never did. College was the first time I felt like I could breathe. No eyes watching to see if I measured up to Elijah. No quiet scoffs when I shared an idea. I studied business and computer science, built side projects, took internships every summer. I started making money from a startup I co-founded in my junior year. Nothing flashy at first, but enough to stop checking my bank balance before buying groceries. Meanwhile, Elijah stayed home. He bounced around. Art school, then a band, then some film program he never finished. My parents funded every venture. Dad even built him a soundproof studio in the garage. I think I was supposed to be proud of that. I tried to be, but a part of me kept asking, would they even lend me a hammer if I needed one? Despite all this, I kept showing up. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional weekend when Mom guilt-tripped me with a passive-aggressive text about how long it's been. I brought gifts. I offered to help with things around the house. I even tried to connect with Elijah, who seemed to like me well enough, in that lazy, confident way of someone who's never had to earn affection. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. Not until later. The moment things really turned began innocently, like all storms do. It was a Sunday dinner, Mom's lasagna, which she only made when she wanted to pretend we were a wholesome family. I hadn't planned on staying long. I had a meeting the next day and work to prep for, but I showed up like always. We sat at the table, Elijah telling some exaggerated story about how a short film he made might be shown at a local theater. Dad leaned in, nodding with pride, and Mom clapped like he'd just won an Oscar. Then Dad turned to me, halfway through his second glass of wine. "You know," he said, pointing his fork lazily at Elijah, "if we'd only had one kid, I think we still would have ended up pretty lucky." Mom chuckled. "We did all right with two," she offered, clearly trying to soften it. But Dad wasn't done. No, I mean it. Sometimes I think, we wish Elijah was our only child." He laughed like it was some harmless joke, the kind that only stings if you let it. But the worst part wasn't the words. It was the way everyone else reacted. Mom smiled. Elijah laughed. Even my aunt, who dropped by for dessert, nodded like Dad had said something wise. And me? I just smiled. Small. Tight. The kind of smile you wear when you're gripping something sharp in your chest, but don't want anyone to see you bleed. Then I'll make that happen, I said quietly. Calmly. Almost too calmly. The words floated out before I even realized what I was saying. The room went still for half a second, just long enough to notice, but then Elijah laughed again, brushing it off like I was being dramatic. Come on, man. Don't be like that, he said, nudging me with his elbow. I didn't answer. I just picked up my plate, walked it to the sink, rinsed it off, and left. That was 6 months ago, and in those 6 months, I've made good on what I said, but not in the way they expected, and definitely not in the way they'll be able to recover from. But before we get to that part, let me tell you what happened next, what they did, what I found out, and why walking away wasn't enough. Because when your own family makes you feel like an intruder in your own life, you don't just disappear quietly. You take everything they never appreciated with you, and then you watch what's left burn. The days after that dinner felt oddly quiet. I didn't call, didn't text. No one reached out either, not even Mom, who used to send those just checking in messages with guilt wrapped in emojis. At first, I figured they were giving me space. Maybe someone realized Dad had gone too far. Maybe Elijah told them I was upset. Maybe, just maybe, they missed me. They didn't. A week passed. Then 2. By the 3rd, I broke and called Mom. I don't know what I expected. An apology, maybe, or even just a "your father didn't mean it like that." But when she picked up, her tone was breezy, like I'd called to borrow sugar. "Oh, Alan, we figured you were just busy again. You're always running around with work." "Yeah," I said, pacing the apartment. "I've been busy, but I thought maybe after what Dad said." She sighed, as if I'd brought up a mildly embarrassing memory. "Your father had a little too much wine. He was joking. You know how he is." "Right," I muttered. There was a pause. Then she added, "Besides, Elijah was really upset after that night. He felt like you were making it all about you. That made me stop walking." "He was upset? You have to understand," she said, with that gentle, condescending tone she always used when I was a kid. "You've always had a chip on your shoulder. We try so hard to make things fair." I didn't answer. I just stared at the wall, letting the silence hang like a noose. "Alan," she continued, "we love you. But sometimes, it feels like you want to be the victim. Like you're waiting for us to disappoint you." I swallowed hard, teeth clenched. I think I just needed to hear someone say they were sorry. "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way." Click. That phone call marked the moment I stopped pretending things could be salvaged. I still went home once after that. Just once. It was Elijah's birthday, a big one. 25. My parents threw him a party in the backyard with a rented canopy, string lights, catered food, even a band. The kind of event you see in commercials for suburban dream homes. I wasn't invited directly. I only knew about it because my cousin Melissa tagged the location on Instagram with a group photo under the banner. "Happy birthday, Eli." There was a comment from Mom. "Our golden boy turns 25. No mention of me. No, wish you could be here, Alan." Nothing. I showed up anyway. Petty? Maybe. But I needed to see it with my own eyes, to see just how invisible I'd become. When I arrived, Elijah was mid-story, surrounded by people. I recognized half the guests from childhood, old neighbors, teachers, family friends. People who used to pinch my cheeks when I was little and tell me I'd do great things. Now, most of them didn't even recognize me. I stood near the fence for almost 10 minutes before anyone even acknowledged I was there. It was Aunt Linda who finally noticed. "Alan, oh my God, look at you." She gave me a hug, too tight and too loud, like she was overcompensating. "We didn't think you'd come." I shrugged. "Didn't get the invite." She laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Oh, you know your mom, scatterbrained." I scanned the crowd. My parents were near the fire pit, chatting with some distant relatives. Dad had a whiskey in hand, smiling proudly as Elijah played bartender. I walked over. "Hey," I said. They both turned. Mom blinked. Dad's smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "Well, look who showed up. We weren't sure you'd come." "I wasn't invited," I replied, forcing a smile. Dad laughed awkwardly. "You know you're always welcome." Elijah walked over, carrying 2 beers. He handed one to Dad, then looked at me. "Didn't think you were into parties." "I'm not." Just thought I'd say hi. There was a beat of silence. Then Dad clapped Elijah on the back. We were just talking about how proud we are of this guy. He's come such a long way. Mom beamed. He really has. The documentary project is going to be incredible. I glanced at Elijah. Documentary? Yeah, he said, sipping his drink. I got a small grant from the Arts Council. Going to do a film on local artists. Mom and Dad helped me put the proposal together. Of course they did. You should stay for cake, Mom added, trying to sound pleasant. It's one of those fancy ones. Red velvet, his favorite. I looked at the three of them. This perfect triangle of pride and attention. I was standing outside it. Always had been. I didn't stay for cake. That night, something snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet kind. The kind that feels like a breath held too long, finally let out. I sat in my car outside their house for a full hour before driving away, fingers clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just started planning. Because the thing about being treated like an afterthought your whole life is you get very good at observing, at studying people, at seeing the cracks they don't even know are there. And I knew things about my family, things they'd forgotten I knew. Financial details, business dependencies, legal vulnerabilities. The startup I'd co-founded had evolved in the years since college. It wasn't flashy like Elijah's projects, but it was profitable. We provided back-end software for local governments and utility companies, stuff most people don't think about, but absolutely rely on. And my parents? They did think about it. Because my dad's small construction company, Owen & Sons, used our systems. When they first needed new scheduling software 3 years ago, I'd offered them a discounted contract through my startup. They happily took it. I'd even given them premium customer support, for free. They loved it. Raved about how seamless everything was now. They used our invoicing, our payroll integration, our scheduling, even the auto-bidding system I'd personally built. They relied on us. They just never remembered who built it. After the birthday party, I sent a formal contract renewal. New terms. Market rate. No more family discount. I used my legal name. Alan Owen, CEO of PRYSM Tech. No mention of our relationship. No pleasantries. Dad called 2 days later. Alan, got your little email. Must be some mistake. No mistake. You want us to pay that much? We've been using your stuff for years. Exactly. There was a pause. You're really going to nickel and dime your own family? I didn't respond. He tried again. This isn't like you. You don't know what I'm like. Click. They didn't switch providers. They couldn't. Not easily. Migration would cost them more and take time. So they paid. Begrudgingly. But that was just the beginning. The real betrayal came a month later. I got a call from Elijah. It was awkward. Stilted. He said he wanted to talk. Maybe grab coffee. Catch up? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our places. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with a laptop and a big fake smile. We chatted for a bit. He asked about work. I asked about the documentary. Then, halfway through his croissant, he said it. So listen, I wanted to ask a favor. Of course. He explained that his grant money wasn't quite enough. He needed better equipment. Sound gear. Editing software. Travel expenses. Just a couple thousand, he said. I know you're doing well now. I blinked. You want me to fund your film? He laughed. Not fun, just help. I stared at him. This brother who had taken so much space in my life. Who laughed when our dad said he wished I didn't exist. Who let me vanish from the family without a word. No, I said flatly. He looked stunned. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not giving you money. His expression shifted, confusion turning to annoyance. Wow. Okay. You've really changed. I stood up. No. I've just stopped pretending. I walked out before he could say more. That night, I got a call from Dad. Voicemail. Angry. Disappointed. How could I treat my brother that way? What happened to family? I deleted the message. Then came the email. From Mom. Long, emotional. She called me ungrateful. Said Elijah was going through a rough time and I was rubbing my success in their faces. That I was selfish. That they'd always tried their best. I didn't reply because I'd finally stopped hoping they'd see me. And I was done playing the quiet son. The next step? Well, let's just say it involved more than emails and invoices. Let's just say the things I built for them. I could just as easily take apart. But I'll get to that. Because the real unraveling, the moment everything came crashing down, happened the night I returned home one last time. And what I found in Dad's office changed everything. The last time I walked through the front door of my childhood home, it felt like stepping into a wax museum. Familiar shapes and faces frozen in time, smiling, unmoving, untouched by reality. It smelled the same, too. That faint mix of pine-scented floor cleaner and whatever candle Mom had burning on the entry table. She always tried to make the house feel warm, cozy, like something out of a holiday movie. But the older I got, the more it felt staged, like the candles were just masking something rotting underneath. I hadn't planned to go back. Not ever. But the call I got from my cousin Melissa changed everything. She didn't even say hello, just blurted it out. Hey, Alan, I think you should know your dad's planning to sue you. I froze. What? Uncle Dave was talking about it last night. He said your dad's been talking to a lawyer. Something about sabotage and breach of family loyalty. I don't even know what that means. I laughed, cold and low. It means he's mad I won't let him exploit me for free anymore. Look, I don't want to be in the middle, she said quickly. But I thought you should know. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there in my apartment, staring at the wall for a long time. Not angry, not even shocked, just tired. This was the family I had tried so hard to love, to support, and now they were plotting legal action behind my back? No, I wasn't letting that slide. So I showed up the next day. I didn't announce it. I didn't knock. I still had a key. It turned in the lock like it always had, though it felt heavier in my hand. The moment the door creaked open, I heard movement, Elijah's voice drifting from the kitchen, Dad's low mutter in response. Then footsteps. Mom appeared first. Alan. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. A guilty ghost. I need to see Dad, I said. He's busy right now. Not a question. I walked past her. Elijah stood at the kitchen island, frozen mid-bite of a bagel. Dude, he said, mouth full. You can't just. Shut up. He blinked, stunned silent. Dad's office door was half open. He looked up from his desk when I stepped in. His laptop was open, phone in one hand, papers in the other. For a second, he looked scared. Then he straightened, mask back on. You don't live here anymore. You don't get to barge in. Planning to sue me? I asked, shutting the door behind me. He scoffed. Maybe I should. You're acting like some kind of corporate snake. You know how much damage you've done. I sent a legal contract. You signed it. You pay for a service. You're my son. Exactly, I said. Which is why I gave you free service for 3 years. Which is why I offered help when no one else did. Which is why I bit my tongue every time you treated me like garbage. He stood up, jaw tight. We gave you everything. No, I said, voice flat. You gave Elijah everything. I raised myself. Get out, he snapped. Before I really do call my lawyer. I stepped closer, quiet now. You know what's funny? You think I owe you something. But I built this. I built everything I have. And you've been benefiting from my work for years without even knowing how it ran. You wouldn't last a week without me. But here you are, trying to destroy the one person who ever gave you something for nothing. You're pathetic, he said. You've always played the victim. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then you're about to see what I look like when I stop being one. I left before I could say something I'd regret. Though at that point, regret felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Back at my apartment, the weight of it all hit me. I wasn't just being cut off anymore. I was being erased. My family had decided I was expendable, that I was only worth something if I stayed quiet and useful. And now that I wasn't, I was dangerous. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my balcony in the cold, knees to my chest, watching the city flicker in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears slipping down my face, hot against the wind. I cried for the kid who wanted to be seen, for the teenager who stopped asking for help, for the man who finally realized no amount of success would make them love him the way he deserved. That was my rock bottom. The moment I let go of the last piece of hope I'd been clinging to. After that, things got quiet. I stopped checking their social media. I blocked their numbers. I told my lawyer to prepare for anything. I even warned my startup partners, just in case. But something else started happening, too. I got up earlier, ate better, went back to the gym. I reconnected with friends I hadn't talked to in years. Started attending a local entrepreneur group. I gave a talk about building value without being noticed. It resonated. A woman came up to me after, Jordan, and said, "You spoke like you knew what it was like to be invisible." We got coffee, then lunch, then more. She was kind, sharp, funny in this dry, observational way that made me laugh even when I didn't want to. She didn't ask about my family. Not at first. But when I told her, she didn't pity me. She just nodded like she understood. "You didn't lose them," she said once. "They lost you." Big difference. I clung to that line. Still do. Business picked up, too. We landed a new contract with a municipal infrastructure firm that tripled our revenue. I hired 2 more engineers. Started mentoring a kid from my old neighborhood who reminded me of me. Quiet, watchful, overlooked. Meanwhile, I heard whispers from the old house. Elijah's documentary fell through. The Arts Council pulled the rest of his funding. Apparently, he missed deadlines. Then came the rumors that Dad's business was struggling. The bids weren't going through. The software was glitching. Payments were late. Deadlines missed. Customers angry. They reached out, of course. A few emails from the company account. A voicemail from Mom saying they were having some technical trouble and could use my help. I didn't respond. Because here's the thing they never understood. I never needed revenge. I just needed freedom. And I was finally learning what that looked like. It looked like choosing who I gave my energy to. It looked like rebuilding a life where I wasn't waiting for a nod of approval from people who had already decided I wasn't enough. It looked like watching them fall, slowly, quietly, inevitably, not because I pushed them, but because they never knew how to stand without leaning on someone else. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, just a normal Tuesday. I had a meeting in the morning, a quick lunch, and then an alert popped up on my phone. Dad's company had filed for bankruptcy. I stared at the screen, unmoving. Then I checked again. It was real. They were done. But the story doesn't end there. Because a few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten. Neat cursive. It was from Mom. And what was inside wasn't what I expected. The envelope sat on my desk for 2 days before I opened it. Something about the handwriting, Mom's careful loops and curves, felt eerie, like a ghost reaching out from a world I'd already buried. I didn't want to read it. Part of me feared it would suck me back in, unravel all the quiet strength I'd spent the past months rebuilding. But curiosity has its own kind of gravity, and I eventually gave in. The letter was 4 pages long, each word perfectly placed, like she'd practiced them in her head 100 times before putting pen to paper. It started with nostalgia, as if invoking old memories might soften me. "Alan, I remember the first time you made us proud. You were 6. You'd drawn a map of our neighborhood from memory. You labeled every street, every tree. Your father couldn't believe it. We even showed it to the neighbors. I had no memory of this." The letter went on, swinging between warm recollections and attempts at justification. She admitted they'd favored Elijah at times, but called it unintentional. She blamed stress, confusion, even cultural expectations. There was no apology, just explanations. And then came the real reason she wrote. "Your father is not well. He's been drinking more. Ever since the business filed, he's been lost. I'm worried about him. Elijah's back home, but he's struggling too. We're all hurting. I know you've chosen distance, but maybe, just maybe, you could help us one last time." I put the letter down, laughing bitterly. One last time. It was never the last time with them. There was always another favor, another request, another guilt-laced plea wrapped in the illusion of love. But this time, something felt different. Not in them, in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was ready. Ready to stop playing defense. Ready to stop waiting for their next blow. Ready to take control of the narrative I'd been written out of. So I sat down at my computer and began to plan, not with rage, but with precision. The first step was simple: information. I had access to more than they realized. Years ago, when I'd set up Dad's company with my software, I'd retained limited administrative access. Nothing unethical. It was standard practice at the time in case they ever needed system recovery or support. They'd never revoked it. They probably didn't even remember it existed. I logged in. The dashboard greeted me like an old friend. The first thing I noticed was the chaos. Invoices overdue by months. Vendor payments bouncing. Employees flagged for non-payment of hours. They were trying to keep the company running on duct tape and denial. And the cherry on top? They'd begun duplicating project bids, copying competitors' submissions, and adjusting them by a few $100s. That was illegal. I took screenshots. Dated. Labeled. Archived. Then I looked deeper. I found correspondence with Elijah, who'd apparently been brought on as a creative consultant for a failed side business Dad tried launching before the collapse. A home renovation content brand, complete with YouTube channel, branded hoodies, and a terrible slogan: "Own up your space." He'd funneled thousands into it. Money that wasn't theirs. Money that technically came from investor-backed projects before the company went under. I gathered more evidence. Emails, bank records, contracts I'd helped them draft. All of it pointed to one thing: fraud, negligence, and desperation. And that's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was going to make them destroy each other. But first, I needed help. Jordan was the first person I called. She didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she said before I even finished explaining. We spent the next 2 weeks assembling a small team: my legal advisor, Jordan's accountant friend who specialized in forensic audits, and an old college roommate of mine, Derek, who worked in cybersecurity and owed me a favor after I bailed him out during a nasty data breach years ago. We called ourselves the Cleanup Crew, though privately I referred to us as something else: the Exit Committee. We met in private Slack channels, exchanged encrypted messages, and met at cafes where no one knew our names. It felt like espionage, which would have been funny if the stakes weren't so personal. The goal wasn't to bankrupt them further. They'd already done that. The goal was exposure. I wanted the world, the community that had praised my father for decades, the arts councils that threw grants at Elijah, the neighbors who clapped when they walked by, to see them for what they truly were. And to do that, I needed one final move. A trap. I started with Elijah. I knew he was trying to launch a new project, some indie documentary about the collapse of the American middle class. The irony was so rich it could have been a screenplay. I created a fake grant foundation. Just a basic landing page, a few testimonials from fabricated board members, a contact form, and a mission statement dripping with progressive buzzwords. I reached out from the fake email address, offering Elijah a $15,000 grant to complete his film, with a condition: we wanted proof of a compelling moral arc, preferably tied to a family business narrative. Predictably, he replied within hours. Enthusiastic, hungry, clueless. He sent us an early draft of his treatment, along with a request for more funding, ideally double, considering my current obligations caring for my sick father. That part made me laugh out loud. We asked for a sample video to assess narrative voice. A week later, he submitted a 12-minute mockumentary in which he played both the struggling artist and the emotionally distant son. At one point, he broke down in fake tears talking about how he had to rebuild his family from ashes. He titled it Phoenix Down. Jordan almost choked on her coffee when I showed her. Meanwhile, my legal advisor began drafting a whistleblower report. We compiled everything: every misused dollar, every falsified invoice, every shady deal from the renovation brand Elijah co-managed. We didn't send it yet. We were saving it. Then came the letter. I wrote it by hand. "Dear Mom, I read your letter, and I believe you meant some of it, but not enough to matter. You want me to come back, to help again. But help, in your eyes, has always meant sacrifice. Mine, my time, my money, my self-worth. I loved you all once. Deeply, desperately. But I can't love people who only know how to take. Still, I want to offer you one last chance to be honest. I'm coming by next week. I'd like to speak with Dad, just the two of us, about everything. Tell him it's important. And tell Elijah not to be there. You'll know why soon. Alan." I mailed it the next day. Then I waited. A week passed. No response. But on the 8th day, I got a text. From Mom. "He'll be here Tuesday at 5. I don't know what this is about, but please don't do anything rash." I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about rashness anymore. It was about closure. I put on a navy blazer, packed a folder, and walked into that house with the calmness of a man attending someone else's funeral. Dad was waiting in the living room. He looked thinner, tired, but still trying to hold on to whatever authority he believed he had. "I got your letter," he said, not rising. I sat across from him, pulled out the folder. "This is everything," I said. "Everything you tried to hide, everything you failed to manage, and everything Elijah helped you ruin." He stiffened. "I haven't submitted it yet, but I will, unless we talk honestly." He laughed once, bitter. "You think you're the only one who knows how to play this game?" "No," I said calmly, "but I'm the only one who's still standing." He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he leaned forward. "What do you want?" There it was. The first real moment of honesty in years. What did I want? Revenge? Maybe. Justice? Definitely. But more than anything, I wanted him to admit it. Out loud. In front of someone else. What I asked him next was simple. And his answer? Well, that's when everything unraveled. But we'll get to that. He stared at the folder for a long time. Not flipping through it. Not reading a single word. Just sitting there. As if he could burn holes in the paper with whatever scraps of pride he still clung to. I let the silence hang. Long enough to remind him that this time, I wasn't the one who would crack first. What do you want? He repeated. I leaned back in the armchair, calm. I want you to tell the truth. His eyebrows lifted. Not to me. To the people you lied to. The investors. The clients. The community that still thinks Owen & Sons was a proud, family-run legacy. I want you to own what you did. What you let Elijah do. The false bids. The missing payments. The stolen grant money. The personal expenses you buried in the business account. All of it. You want me to humiliate myself? He snapped. But there was no heat behind it. Just weariness. I want you to stop pretending. For once. He rubbed his face, jaw clenched. And if I don't, I tap the folder. Then I go public. The press release is already written. The whistleblower report is sitting in a secure Dropbox. I've got signed statements from 2 of your former employees and screen captures from the internal system. If this goes to court, it won't be a lawsuit. It'll be an audit, an investigation, and a public spectacle. You'll lose what little you have left. You'd really do that to your own father? I smiled faintly. You're not my father. You're the man who raised my brother. I just lived here. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't tense. It wasn't charged. It was hollow, like he'd finally heard me, not as a rebellious child or a disappointment, but as something he'd never planned for, his reckoning. Fine, he said at last. What does it look like? I laid it out. He would issue a formal statement, acknowledging the financial misconduct, apologizing to investors, and announcing the dissolution of the company's remaining assets. He would release a personal letter to all former employees explaining what happened. And most importantly, he would withdraw the fraudulent applications Elijah had submitted on his behalf to a second round of funding from the state's Creative Development Board, applications I had already intercepted and copied. Dad stared at the floor the whole time I spoke, then nodded once. A man cornered by his own choices. You're going to ruin us, he muttered. I stood, collected the folder. You did that yourselves? I'm just documenting it. And then I walked out. I didn't stop by the kitchen. Didn't look for Mom. Didn't check to see if Elijah had come home early. I just walked out the same way I came in, quiet, calm, free. 2 days later, the statement went live. It wasn't dramatic. Just a 3-paragraph post on the company's shuttered website and a series of emails to their contact list. My father admitted to serious errors in financial management, apologized for unintentional misrepresentation, and took full responsibility for the decisions made under my leadership. It didn't name me. I didn't need it to. Because the fallout began almost immediately. Old clients responded first, some angry, some disappointed, some just confused. Investors pulled out of anything remotely connected to the Owens name. Former employees filed for unpaid wages through the Department of Labor. The local paper picked up the story a week later and ran a small expose. From local staple to silent collapse. What happened to Owen & Sons? But the real bomb dropped when the Arts Council rescinded Elijah's previous grant and flagged him from applying again for 5 years. They issued a public notice, citing misuse of funds and misrepresentation of project progress. Elijah spiraled. He posted a 9-minute video on social media that he probably thought looked heartfelt and tortured, but came off like a bad audition tape. He blamed a toxic business culture, claimed to be a scapegoat, and even said he never asked for the pressure of being the golden child. Jordan and I watched it over lunch. She shook her head. This man really thinks he's the victim in your story. He's always been the star of his own movie, I said. It's just finally getting bad reviews. A few days later, Mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. It was short. Not angry. Not pleading. Alan, we got your message. Loud and clear. I hope you're happy now. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about happiness. It was about closure. After that, I didn't hear from them again. I learned from a neighbor that they sold the house. Quietly. Below market value. Rumor was they moved 2 towns over into a rental property. Elijah, apparently, was couch surfing with an old bandmate. My father? No one knew. He stopped showing up at community events. Stopped answering emails. Just vanished from the world he used to hold court in. And me? I rebuilt. The startup expanded. We opened a second office across the state. I hired people who reminded me of younger me. Quiet, overlooked, brilliant. I set up a scholarship fund in my old high school for kids interested in tech and business. I named it after a teacher who once told me I had something special when no one else did. Jordan and I moved in together. We adopted a rescue dog named Milo who snores louder than a jet engine. Sometimes we sit on the balcony at night, wine in hand, city lights flickering, and she asks me, "Do you ever miss them?" I always tell the truth. No, I miss the version of them I hoped existed. But I'm done grieving people who never existed to begin with. She nods, understands. That's what I love most about her. The revenge didn't make me rich, didn't make me famous. It made me whole. It reminded me that I wasn't born to be an afterthought. I wasn't meant to live in someone else's shadow. I carved out my own light. And the last thing I did, the final move, was this. I changed my last name. Legally. Officially. I dropped the Owen. No announcement. No fanfare. Just a signature on paper. A quiet severing of the thread that had once tied me to people who mistook blood for ownership. And as I walked out of the courthouse, new ID in hand, I felt it. Not triumph. Not vengeance. Just peace. They said they wished Elijah was their only child. Now they got what they wanted. And I got something better. Freedom.